Hello there, welcome back to the channel. It's Nerd World Empire. This episode is going to be something of a ramble, maybe a rant, something. Not too sure what it's going to be yet, it's a bit freeform. Something that bothers me about the burn specifically. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below your thoughts on this ramble, because I'm going to be kind of jumping all over the place here. There's a couple of things about it that bother me from new Star Trek canon as it is. Now, I actually kind of enjoy Discovery. There are elements of it I don't like, and there are elements of it I do, but I can say the same thing about every Star Trek series. I find a lot of the hate Discovery gets to be a little unfounded, particularly because people always saying, oh, it's not political. So it's like Star Trek has always been political, and it's always tried to take current theatre of politics and inject it into itself. Sometimes they tackle other issues. I think Discovery does it a little heavy-handed, but the fact that it's doing it is just doing what Star Trek has always done. I personally am not a big fan of the Michael Burnham character. I love the actress, I loved her in The Walking Dead, but I think, bottom line, she's a Mary Sue. She's a character who can do everything and is good at everything, and if everyone had already listened to her, everything would be great. And that brings me again, circular reasoning, round to the burn. The burn bothers me because there are certain elements of it that make no sense. The idea that one Kelpian having a temper tantrum, no matter how exaggerated the tantrum was, makes no bloody sense. That all the dilithium actively in a warp core somewhere in a reactor would blow up. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It breaks something of Star Trek canon. That sounds more like something that you would hear in a much older, more crude science fiction show. Maybe really, really old Star Trek from the 60s, or maybe something more surreal sci-fi from, like from the 70s or the 80s, where people's comprehension of just how big the galaxy is doesn't really set well with them. It doesn't make sense. Now, getting past that, and I mean, I'm having to struggle to get past that, because when I learned that's what caused the burn, I was like, do you have any idea what that would have done to the universe, to the galaxy? Assuming that not all the lithium everywhere was destroyed, just active dilithium within a current active warp core, the amount of knowledge, scientific information, people that would have died, not to mention what happens to all the antimatter reactors that are on Earth. Do they explode? Because power generation on planets a lot of the time was the same as what was used aboard a starship. A bit like how an aircraft carrier might have a nuclear reactor, but you can also have a nuclear reactor powering California. Well, maybe not the whole state, but you get my meaning. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't. Getting past that, the bigger bother that I have is, where was all the other alternative forms of propulsion? Listing a few. Literally, this is off top of my head. Off top of my head. Quantum slipstream drive, which we know Starfleet had access to. The spore drive, obviously. Alternative energy sources to propel warp reactors were utilized by numerous species. For example, dilithium didn't exist on Earth when Zefram Cochrane launched his warp ship. So what was he using? Nuclear energy? Some kind of battery solar energy? What? What was he using to power the warp reaction in the first place? Then you've got dicyclic warp drive, which we saw in an episode of Voyager. You've got various other displacement drives and other types. Those are just off the top of my head without going too much into it. What about Borg transwarp drive? Did that use dilithium? Maybe, but we know that slipstream drive didn't, so, or it potentially didn't. I mean, and like I said, dicyclic was coaxial warp was another one actually, which used spatial folding technology. Again, seen in an episode of Voyager. Subspace catapults, also seen in an episode of Voyager. Wormhole drives. Now, other races may have had these. Where were they? Why didn't suddenly, I don't know, the Tholians hypothetically may have had coaxial. They probably didn't, but let's say they did. Why didn't the Tholians suddenly take over the Alpha Quadrant? Because they didn't want to? They didn't want all those resources? They didn't care? They weren't interested? What? Why didn't they? Where are all these people that have these other advanced forms of propulsion? Starfleet alone may have primarily used dilithium-based antimatter reactors in their ships, but we know they did experiment with other forms of propulsion, other energy sources, and there's nothing in canon that I'm aware of, and correct me in the comments if I am genuinely wrong, and you know I'm wrong. It doesn't have to be dilithium. It just has to generate enough energy. There are many alternative energy sources within the Trek universe. Nuclear might be nowhere near it, but the antimatter reactors don't necessarily need dilithium. There's other forms of ways to generate a warp bubble than that. If they really thought, well, we can't get hold of any dilithium to power our ships, fine, use something else. Also, necessity is the mother of all invention. Centuries go by and no one thought of it. It took Discovery turning up for Space Jesus to discover why the burn happened, find the source of it, find a planet full of dilithium, and help one planet as well. I know there's a lot of resources on one planet, but seriously, one planet for the whole of the fucking Alpha and Beta quadrants or beyond? Really? The burn pisses me off. It really annoys me, and it's the first thing that's really set me off as a Trekkie in Star Trek, going, I don't like that. That doesn't make sense, but it's such a big part of the story. You can't ignore it. It can't. It has to be addressed. It has to be dealt with. It can't just be forgotten. And Star Trek has a bad habit of that. It'll introduce something and it just kind of forgets about it, never revisits it. And it can be annoying for that. All Star Trek, original series, Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, all of them have that habit. It's not just Star Trek either. Various sci-fi shows do the same thing. There's often too many things happen and writers can't keep up with it. But in universe it matters, and sometimes they get it right, like Picard with the flute. He learned to play the flute, this little alien flute, when he was he lived an entire lifetime in 20 minutes, and they realized that was a profound change to Picard's existence. He couldn't just forget about it and move on. He had a family, he had children, he had grandchildren. He lived a whole life. They couldn't just forget about that. So they've always had it impact him. They've always had it be something that he has remembered and he has taken solace in and perhaps drawn pain from to make himself stronger as a man, as an officer, and as a human. So it is, modern Trek has made, just like old Trek, several questionable decisions, and in my opinion the burn is the one that really bugs me. The origins of the burn, how it happened and why it happened, particularly I find annoying. I can maybe forgive the warp drive thing, because I could understand how traumatic that would be and what a great loss. Not to mention the intellectual loss, because in some ways Starfleet is a bit like the old Roman army. When the Empire fell, without all the soldiers and all the hierarchy and everyone keeping it under control, the Empire kind of fell apart and went into disrepair because the army was doing everything. It kind of seems the same way a lot of the time. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it isn't this way, because I know there's a lot of background stuff going on that you don't see in Star Trek. But it always feels like Starfleet seems to be the impetus for everything. So if they lost all of them, not to mention a lot of civilian outposts would have been powered by the same stuff, you would have had a massive brain drain on the Federation. So I could understand the chaos and anarchy and probably a dark age that would have followed such a cataclysmic event. But why it happened bugs the hell out of me. And nah, I can't forgive Discovery for that one. I want them to fix it. More timey-wimey stuff, please, to fix this. That was my rant. It's not a coherent thing because it's just something that's been bugging me, as I only recently finished watching Star Trek Discovery Season 4, and it's just something that's been bugging me about the show in general. So there we have it. Maybe not a canonical thing, but just a rant.
I just want to take this moment to thank you for watching that video. If you liked what you saw, please check out my social links in the description box below to Instagram and Twitter and others, and also is down there a link to my Patreon page where you can support this channel and the others as I try to grow this franchise and do this more regularly. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and bye bye.